Creativity requires that you work very hard. At the same time, it comes to you almost magically. You don't know why or how it happens. Your whole being is committed to the creative act. I'm transformed onto a different plane. And that plane is where my religion and my artistic uh, come together. It's an ecstasy. And that, for me, that's the holy, and that is where I meet God. I was studying for about 13 years to be an academic, to teach theology and philosophy in college. And so I had to kind of master a lot of these books. But my last year in graduate school, I was sitting in a class, and it was whole semester on an obscure German theologian by the name of Ritschl. And I was sketching pictures of my professor, which I always did because you can stare at them, and I would stare at them and draw their pictures. If I didn't like them, I'd give them a big nose. And my friend who was sitting next to me in the class, she said, "Charles, you're going with me to an art class tonight." And I did. I went to a class downtown in Madison, New Jersey, and I started taking classes in drawing and painting, and the paintings got thicker and thicker and eventually turned into sculpture. But to do sculpture and painting and drawing fit my brain because at about the same time I had a test of my uh, reading ability, and it was declared that I was dyslexic, which means it's a misnomer really, because dys is a negative phrase, but dyslexia is common for a lot of people. I was really strongly uh, oriented toward right brain thinking, which is images and pictures, instead of left brain, which is words, paragraphs, pages, books. In the daytime, I was working as a pastor and then a social action worker in the church. And but at night, I would go home and either take a class or just go to my parsonage garage, and I would do my sculpting, which was kind of a challenge because early on, way back, the Ten Commandments had these phrase, "You shall not make a graven image." And I hadn't quite caught up with the new translation, which says it's okay. Images are okay. Moses made an image of a snake, and images are okay. Bezalel in the Bible, in Exodus, is an artist, and he made sculptures for the tent of meeting, which the Hebrews did in the wilderness. So it's no problem with images. What's the problem is making an idol. And the new translation says, "You shall not make an idol." Well, I was teaching this confirmation class for my students in the church, and we would go over the Ten Commandments. But then at that time it said, "You shall not make a graven image." Then I'd go home and make graven images. Well, the new translation just erases that problem, even though we haven't caught up with that in the Protestant churches very much. Uh, it's okay to make images. It's idols we don't want to make. And we have idols all the time, like in our country, money it's very much an idol. And success and being a big important person is idolatrous. But making images is not a problem. Gradually over the years, I began writing books, and I would add occasionally a picture of my sculpture. But started out using other artists, but I always wanted to put pictures in the books and the writing, because pictures just spoke to me, made sense. And then I gradually made books that had my own sculpture pictures in them. But I still had to make a living, and I did that in a church that has been very much against images. The Congregational Church took all the images out of the church. Protestantism, they went through and just took all the pictures down. And they still, in Switzerland and other places, have no images at all. Well, for me, there's nothing wrong with it. In fact, it's necessary for right-brained people to have images to communicate the gospel. So that's what I've been doing. This is a really rough, it's just the beginning of a clay, wet clay piece, which I've been working on. I'm going to change it a lot before I fire it. Well, I buy a clay, which is very moist, very pliable, and I lay it out, and then I start working, building out and cutting in, but not cutting in much, because that doesn't work when you do that. This is a relief sculpture, which actually these are pretty much all the same, but you get the perspective, which is a magical thing. Rodin said that sculpture is just a matter of creating shadows. Well, that's a shadow right there, which shows his robe comes to his elbow there. So you create shadows by cutting in on the clay, and those shadows become the object, which makes it look like it's real, if you do it right. And this is an old ancient barn which we've repurposed from a hay barn, which was a part of this old farm, into an art studio. This clay piece has a horse pulling a very heavy load, and he's not getting very far with it. It's very difficult for him to pull that load. And there are many times in my life, and probably in a lot of other people, that you're just doing all you can to make it through the day, and it doesn't look like you're going to survive. And it feels like you're pulling a very heavy load, and you don't know what to do with it. And a lot of us go through life feeling like we're pulling a heavy load, and the heavy load isn't there at all. And that's what I discovered when I was carving that wooden piece, that, hey, I'm pulling loads of stuff that I did, dumb things that I'm embarrassed about. I'll never tell anybody, but they don't exist. And just like that horse, the reins are loose. There isn't really anything that he's pulling except in his own head. One I made after that is a picture of me sitting in a sleigh with these wild horses pulling the sleigh, but behind me there is my child. And we all carry our children with us. By that I mean ourselves as a child. My child is still here. The feelings, the emotions, the fears that I, as a child, still there. Late at night, they come back and start haunting me. And my child is sitting there and he's safe. And my adult self is holding the reins real tight, pulling through life like wild horses pulling a sleigh. That's one of my favorite pieces because it says, I'm safe. That's a way of celebrating the positive, the hope, the love that animates our lives in the midst of danger and fear and experiences from the past that come forward and haunt us. They're not there. And I saw this piece, just a limb, it kind of sitting around the farm for a long time. And then I realized that if I turned it upside down, put the roots up here, would have arms for a crucifix. So I carved this crucifix of Jesus on the cross, and I made the cross out of some old wood with wrought iron nails, which would have been used in Jesus' time. I wanted to show really how terrible a crucifix is. It's the worst form of murder that you can imagine, and he's hanging there. In our church, Protestant churches, we have an empty cross because it's believed that Jesus resurrected and did not actually die permanently. He came back, and that's why the cross is empty. That's the way it is in nearly all Protestant churches that have any. But he was crucified. It's an important part of our religion to say that someone has the courage to die for someone else, for everybody, if you believe him. The gospel for me is not just a private, personal thing. It's social. And if we do live the kind of life we want to live, we fight for justice and peace. And we not only have peace as private, we try to work for peace internationally and nationally and in our local communities to say and to communicate with our lives that we can live in a very harmonious way if we would just back off and stop trying to impress people with our riches and with our prestige, and let the child in us come forth and be more loving and more creative and more peaceful in our lives, both locally, nationally, and internationally. And we back off from this aggressive approach to life, which is very death dealing. We have 2 eyes, we have 2 ears, fortunately just 1 mouth. But in our church, we have done away with the Reformation with a lot of images, with what our eyes can see. And I'd like to bring that back. That is a lot of visual communication of the good news. And for me, that happens in the visual communication through sculpture.